Do you use chicken manure as a fertilizer? Do you do it because you're an organic gardener and the bag says organic? But is it really organic? Is chicken manure truly organic? Why do I say that? Well, there's a lot of talk lately about the inputs of chickens that produced chicken manure. And those inputs include, of course, feed. And the feed usually in a chicken's diet includes things like corn, soybeans, bakery meal. Well, corn and soybeans, according to the USDA, over 90% of corn and soybean acreage in the United States is planted with genetically engineered seeds. But before we go any further, let's try to define the difference between GMO, a genetically modified organism, and GE, something that's genetically engineered. Vermont Public Radio's Kathleen Masterson wrote about this a few years ago and points out the term GMO doesn't mean much from a scientific perspective. Humans have been genetically modifying plants since long before modern agriculture was born, some 11,000 years ago. Plant biologist Gene Harris of the University of Vermont put it this way, that part of the problem is that GMO is not a scientific term, because we've been modifying plants since way before prehistory. But then it gets even more confusing. There is a nonprofit organization called the Non-GMO Project. It's an organization that will test and verify that food manufacturers' products contain less than 0.9% of genetically engineered ingredients. That's right, the label says non-GMO, but the definition refers to genetic engineering. The organization's website defines GMOs as organisms whose genetic material has been artificially manipulated in a laboratory through genetic engineering, or GE. And GE is considered a more precise term by the FDA and others. So the thing you need to know is when people say they are against GMOs, they're not against GMOs. They really mean genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a modern technology that makes genetic changes to a plant's DNA. There's a long list of specific genetic engineering techniques that are considered GE, and that includes the direct injection of foreign genes into plants' cells. And to take the mud even deeper, there's something called bioengineered food. Congress long considers labeling bills, usually GMO labeling bills, but they don't use the term GE on its label. They instead define it as bioengineered food. And the term bioengineered food leaves a lot open to interpretation. And the FDA has written in the past about any bill coming out of Congress by saying it will likely mean that many foods from genetically engineered sources will not be subject to this bill because many genes that are added to crops using GE techniques are indeed found in nature, such as BT, which is used to make crops pest resistant. So much for our slog through the mud here. So is what comes out after those chickens have been eating that GE corn and soybeans? Does what comes out? Is that organic? Well, that's a good question. For that, we bring in Steve Zien. He is Sacramento, California's organic advocate, president of Living Resources Company. And chicken manure is, for an organic fertilizer, Steve, it certainly is controversial.
It has become so. And until you brought this issue up to me, I never really thought about it. And I think that's kind of what the organic certification organizations and USDA, who run the organic program, are counting on, that we don't really realize that this is a potential issue.
If 90% of the corn and soybeans are grown via GE seed, that has to make its way into most chicken feed, especially the commercial chicken operations that are producing either egg-laying hens or broiler meat for poultry. But that manure has to go somewhere because otherwise it's a big pollutant. So they sell it to the garden industry as fertilizer. But is it truly organic? If you're an organic gardener, should you be concerned about chicken manure?
I think the basic thing is, how concerned are you about genetically engineered anything? At this point, it's so prevalent in almost everything we eat. even if you are eating 100% organic, there is contamination. When plants are grown genetically engineered, pollen is genetically engineered, and in some crops, that pollen is blown around by wind. Sometimes it's transported by various animals like bees. And so it travels to even organically grown produce, some contamination in almost everything we eat.
So should we just go with the OMRI label that states chicken manure as a fertilizer is organic and be done with it and not worry about it?
I would not. I have changed since researching this topic. I teach classes in gardening, and I will no longer tell people that chicken manure is organic, because the vast majority of chicken manure comes from, as we mentioned earlier, feedlots. And feedlots, those animals are fed with primarily feed that is genetically engineered. There have been studies done, although very, very few, that the stuff that comes out in the manure is not fully digested. There is undigested pieces of that genetically engineered food coming out pretty much just how as it went in. And so it does contain that genetically engineered material. And so if you are concerned about the various issues related to genetic engineering and genetic engineered crops and the various potential problems that we can have with genetically engineered organisms, can be something that you want to avoid. And I would recommend people avoid using chicken manure. There are options, though, because there are companies that utilize farms that are raising their animals organically. And so they are feeding their animals feed that is not genetically engineered. And so there's going to be minimal contamination. So if you purchase chicken manure from an organic farm, then the GE issue should not be a problem.
I came across a couple of chicken manure fertilizer products that claim to be from chickens that have been fed organically. And you can usually find those products available at retailers that specialize in organic products. And of course, when you say that, I'm probably talking about Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. And I am. I saw one product there called Nature's Best Organic Feeds that, according to the label, their chickens are organically fed.
Yeah. So
it's really up to the consumer.
Yeah. You really have to do your research to find out the source of that manure. And it's the same with your seed and all of these various things. But there are some chicken fertilizers and composts that have manure in them raised that is provided by the animals that have been grown organically. There's a product called NutriGrow Organic Chicken Manure, and it's a farm out in Colorado where they use or they raise their chickens cage-free and all organic. There's a product that's sold nationally called Malibu Compost. They don't use chicken manure, but they use dairy manure, and their dairy is not only organic, but it's biodynamic, which is like organic plus. If you believe the website at Home Depot, they sell a product called Nature's Prescription. It is an organic compost fertilizer, and it says on the label that it is approved non-GMO.
Certified by whom?
It doesn't say.
Yeah. Do you trust labels, and why can't they be more forthcoming on labels? I think that's part of the big problem here is manufacturers of fertilizers and compost and soil products need to have a more thorough ingredients list and the source of those ingredients, and B, a date of manufacture.
Yeah, the date of manufacture can help because you do lose some of the nutrient value over time. In many cases, the products that contain animal manures, one of the bigger benefits is not so much the nutrients, but the biology that manure contains. And what that biology, when applied to the soil and watered in, will do to benefit your soil. The dates really become important, or at least we think it might become important, because again, there's no research done on how well these organisms survive in the bags or crates or whatever, how long those organisms can survive in that manure if it's not put down on the ground. Manure is a really important component to creating a healthy soil. And a lot of organic farms have animals on them so that they can get their own manure, so they don't have to purchase manure. And then as a result, it's also going to be organic manure that will have minimal contamination of genetically engineered material. And so they want organic farmers and organic gardeners to be able to utilize what is for a long time being considered one of the best sources of fertilization for organic crops. It's got the nutrients, it's got the biology, it's absolutely a wonderful thing. But, years ago, it wasn't contaminated with herbicides. It wasn't contaminated with various drugs and antibiotics.
Well, we learned a lot today. I think the big takeaway on this is caveat emptor, Latin for buyer beware. You, the consumer, have to do your own research about what's best for you and your garden. Steve Ziens with Living Resources Company. And Steve, thanks for diving into the manure with us.
It's always fun to talk crap with you.
Thank you.